What's up, Ravens fans? Welcome into an off-season edition of Ravens Unscripted. We've got Garrett, Cliff, and Ryan here to answer some questions facing the offense. Guys, put your GM hat on here. All right, first up, I'm going to change it up. Mink, you get first crack at this one.
All right.
Joe Flacco, what do we see here moving forward? Look, it is obvious that he's going to move forward probably with another team. John Harbaugh made that clear after the game against LA. But is it a trade? Is it a releasing of him? And then just thoughts on Joe.
Well, the Ravens would obviously prefer to trade him as opposed to releasing him, just because from a financial perspective, it's the same, but you get something in return if you're able to trade him. And I think that's a possibility. You look at Joe Flacco and everybody thinks about the record-breaking contract. Well, that's been a number of years ago. It's not the same anymore. Yeah, he's affordable. So teams with the salary cap space can say, all right, I don't want to compete with somebody else in free agency, or even have to pay perhaps more in free agency if he were to hit the market. I'll give up something in return to make sure I have a former Super Bowl winner who has a big arm and can help me now. So I think that, you look at Sam Bradford last year, he got $20-some million. Joe Flacco's below that number.
Yeah, I mean,
has less injuries than Sam Bradford and is better.
Another one, Case Keenum last year, the Broncos, right. I think 2 years, $20 million guaranteed. And I think we can confidently say, Garrett, that Joe is way above that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, first of all, I think a lot of people around here are going to miss Joe. And that's not an indictment of Lamar or anything, but I just think that we took for granted this guy's character, how this guy conducted himself, coming to work every single day and being ready to play every single week for 11 years. So I just want to put that out there that you got to appreciate him for all that he did here. Secondly, it's fun to talk about which team he's going to go to, because there's some really intriguing options. Denver, you mentioned, Evan. How about if he were to go to Denver, if they move on from Case Keenum and then Gary Kubiak were to potentially come back and be an offensive coordinator? There's some rumblings of that. That's a possibility. I don't know if it happens. Jacksonville, another team. New York. I mean, I think the Giants would be a really interesting one, depending what they want to do with Eli.
Potentially.
The Dolphins. How about Washington? If he just went down the road an hour and played for the Redskins, depending on what happens with Alex Smith's injury. So there's a lot of really interesting targets. And I think that the trade option, I agree, Ryan. If you can trade him and get something in return, either maybe a mid-round pick. I think Alex Smith is probably the comp. For me, that would be the most comparable version. They got a second-round pick?
Yep.
And then they also got a cornerback in return. Yep. So if you can get a second or third-round pick and a player, that would be a big win.
And Cliff, helping with this trade aspect, it's a weak quarterback draft, at least reportedly at this point. So if you're a team, maybe you think, I'll wait a couple years for Trevor Lawrence, and maybe Joe Flacco fills the gap between that.
Maybe, and this is a win-now league, though. I mean, Joe Flacco's got a better arm and a better resume than most of these quarterbacks we've already talked about. You know he can play under pressure. You know he's been durable. You know he has a lot of experience, and he's going to be well-respected in whatever locker room he goes to. So I'd be really surprised if the Ravens aren't able to make a deal with Joe Flacco involved, because there's going to be a market for him. It's not just going to be one or two teams to me. So a deal, I think, is going to happen. He's going to end up being somewhere he wants to go. And I think he's going to play well, at least initially next year, because he was playing well this year at times before he got hurt.
Well, here's the funny thing. How many times does the Super Bowl MVP hit the market? Never. Now, this year, Nick Foles is going to be another really interesting one, another Super Bowl MVP. Those two are going to be kind of jockeying for, a game of musical chairs as to who goes where. They're going to impact each other.
Well, part of the shift from Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson was also the shift in production from the wide receiver core, most notably John Brown and Michael Crabtree. And Cliff, I'll give you first crack at this. How do you see that group of three that we spent a lot of time, for good reason, talking about in the preseason and early in the year, kind of shaping out here into 2020 or 2019?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be changes at that position. I think that Willie Snead is the one who fits best moving forward with the Ravens. I think he had a good rapport with Lamar. Obviously, he's a guy who loves catching the ball over the middle and is tough.
An interesting point. They live very close to each other down in Florida. So Willie says during this offseason, we can get together all the time and get on the same page.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I think he's a guy who could stay. But this offense is really tough for a guy like John Brown. I mean, his forte is the deep ball. They got away from that, the Ravens did, once they made the switch. He's not even a big guy who can help you a lot as a blocker from the wide receiver position. And I don't think Crabtree, my opinion, he'll be back either here. So they did upgrade the wide receiver position. But again, we talked about they have to have players who fit with Lamar. I think that there's going to definitely be some change over there.
I think the receiver position is one that will probably have to be addressed in the draft. And that's something we've been talking about here in Baltimore for a very long time. Now, the question is whether they do it early, because I do think that there's higher priority positions of need. You know, maybe interior offensive line, potentially a running back, a stud running back.
Defensive players based on
Defense pass rusher,
Yep.
you know, so I don't necessarily think it's the first priority, but I do think that will be more likely draft.
But and just a quick follow, and I think we always have to have now the layer of what's a Lamar offense look
Exactly.
like. So
That's exactly what I
your
was gonna say.
traditional wide receiver that I agree this organization would love to get right near the top of or the middle of the draft, is that something you do with this version that we expect the offense to look like?
I just think you're more likely to get that in the draft than you are free agency, where guys may be saying, I just want to put up stats. I want to put up numbers.
Yeah.
You know, like John Brown on a one-year contract wanted to go to a team where he felt like he would put up some big numbers. That's what players will be looking to do, and the receivers didn't put up huge numbers when Lamar took over. So I think that's something that's going to factor into this.
The Ravens have attacked the wide receivers position via free agency over the years because I think Joe Flacco is it's a chip in that pitch. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult of a pitch with Lamar because the Ravens aren't throwing so much.
Yeah, and we move now to tight ends, and I think this position becomes even more valuable in the Lamar offense, if we want to call it that. But two names, Max Williams and Nick Boyle, coming off of their rookie deals. Ryan, 4 tight ends on the roster. Do we see this happening again? Do they shift things
It would not
around?
shock me if they brought both or I think at least one of those guys back. I think they fit in well here in Baltimore. It's not like they're going to go somewhere else and have
The
a
value might be higher here.
Exactly. Exactly, because they fit Lamar like we're talking about. So it's not like they're going to have a huge price tag if they hit the open market. There people are clamoring for their services. So I think a reunion is probably in the cards.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously Nick Boyle, I think, could be a guy who really fits well here, or he has been. And also like the fact that they have these 2 young tight ends now who do fit with Lamar, who do have some ability. I mean, Mark Andrews, to me, was really strong from start to finish. Hayden Hurst, he was getting a lot of, grief midway through the season. He came on late in the season. You can see he has talent. And I think this year is going to help Hayden Hurst moving forward. So the tight end position is one position where I think the Ravens don't have to feel like they have to make, as in past years, either a move or sometimes 2 moves in the draft. They had a good draft with the tight ends. That position is strong. No matter what happens moving forward, I think they'll be okay there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I think at least one, maybe both of those guys are back on the team.
Well, that's just one side of the ball. Still some questions on the defensive side of the ball as well, and we'll cover that here on the Unscripted Couch. Check back at BaltimoreRavens.com for more.